Hi, I'm Baron Metz, Professor of Anesthesiology, and I'm here to tell you about my new book, Waking Up Safer, an Anesthesiologist Record. Now, I've entitled this video, Magic and Mystery, How Do Anesthetics Really Work? Now, as you all know, by now, if you've watched some of my videos, anesthesia started at the Massachusetts General Hospital, pictured behind me on the wall. The first anesthetic was an ether anesthetic administered through this device, or a similar device, by a William Morton. If you look to the left and below, you see the Greek goddess Hypno. Now, she is the goddess of sleep. And sleep and anesthesia are far from the same thing, as I will explain in the next moments. Consider a patient that I anesthetized some years ago. She required a dilatation and curettage, which requires a general anesthetic. And she was really quite nervous about the events. So as I placed an IV, I asked her a few quick questions, and she prattled away merrily as I induced anesthesia and then went off to sleep in mid-sentence, stopping in mid-sentence as I deepened the anesthetic with some halothane. Procedure was over in about 15 minutes, and I stopped the halothane, allowing her to awaken from the anesthesia. Her eyelids fluttered and she picked up the conversation in mid-sentence, exactly where she had led off. She prattled on merrily after this event with absolutely no memory of the intervening surgical events that had occurred. In fact, it's almost as if her brain stopped and she just continued the conversation after the anesthetic. That is the magic and mystery of anesthesia, and it is still one of the great puzzles of medicine. To try and unmask some of these puzzles, I will try and refer to some of the research work that is ongoing in the discipline of anesthesiology as we speak. The complexity of the matter is because while we would have thought that the explanation of anesthesia would be very simple, given that ether, a very simple compound, provided anesthesia, we now learn that many different agents like propofol, for example, isoflurane or halothane, or in fact the benzodiazepines like Valium or midazolam, can all produce the same anesthetic, at least anesthetic outward state. How can this be that all of these different drugs can have the same effect? To study this a little bit further, Dr. Emery Brown at Harvard Medical School has been studying EEG, electroencephalogram patterns, to look at anesthesia, coma, and sleep, and to try and compare them. So an EEG is basically a set of electrodes that are placed across the skull, and they show an electronic or multiple electronic signals. And the essence of it is that as we induce anesthesia with any of the agents that I told you, we have a change in the electronic patterns that come off the brain onto the EEG. When we are at a phase 3 of anesthesia, according to the EEG patterns, a state deep enough for a patient to undergo surgical anesthesia like my patient had that I described, the patterns look much like a saw would, a serrated saw would. So we see a serrated EEG pattern, and then we see gaps as the whole gaps have been taken out of the saw. We call that an isoelectric pattern. Also, this is known as burst suppression. Now, at this stage, which is the stage of phase 3 of anesthesia, the EEG looks exactly the same as brain vegetative coma. Now, if we were to deepen the anesthetic even more with more halothane, we would eventually get what we call a flat isoelectric EEG pattern, which is the same as deep coma, not at all like sleep, and the same as death as well, or dead patient. Now, of course, we don't want that depth of anesthesia because it appears now that having depths of anesthesia at this level may well have postoperative sequelae, particularly for fragile and older patients. Now, putting all of this together, the easiest way to explain how anesthesia works is to explain that anesthesia disrupts the electronic connections between the thinking and remembering brain, the cortex of the brain, and the feeling or sensing brain, which is vested in the limbic system, with the thalamus in the midbrain switching on and off oscillatory brain circuits required for arousal. So what the brain is doing is balancing between arousal and sleep or coma. And there are multiple circuits invested in assuring a balance between arousal and sleep. To understand this, we must recognize that the wake state is, of course, very important for our survival, to eat, drink, forage, etc., as an animal or as a human. But sleep is essential for brain function because it is a restorative brain function. And if people don't sleep, they will literally die. So let me give you an example of an antelope in the veldt. The antelope is under continuous stress of being hunted by a lion. And yet, the antelope must sleep, because without sleep, the antelope will not survive. So there have been multiple brain circuits set up, redundant brain circuits, to assure arousal should the slightest hint of the lion occur to the antelope. It's because of all these multiple circuits that we have this complexity in understanding anesthesia and, of course, coma. And it's because of these multiple circuits that can be interacted with that different drugs at different levels in the brain can have a similar outward effect that we call the anesthetic state. Left unanswered by some of the things I've discussed here are other concerns that we have under anesthesia. And those are the subject of amnesia, where the patient appears conscious but has no memory of those events, and the issue of awareness under anesthesia, where, to the anesthesiologist, we believe the patient is unconscious, but in fact the patient is not and is aware of the events. Fortunately, this is a very rare event. And another concern about anesthetics is whether or not there are any lasting brain effects, particularly in the young and also in the elderly, of the chemically induced coma that we call anesthesia when that is induced. To get answers to these questions, I would encourage you to read my book, Waking Up Safer, An Anesthesiologist's Record. It will attempt to answer many of these unanswered questions, and if it doesn't answer them fully, it will at least prepare you for the next anesthetic that will inevitably be visited upon you. I thank you for your attention.